Hello, this is Kyou of Kyou System. I'm trying to make sure that when I keep recording these podcast episodes that I don't, get ahead of myself with it, right? Or I don't lose sight of what this is actually supposed to be. Because I keep, when I recorded the first few episodes, I didn't really have any issues with this. But as I've gotten further and further in with making this series, I've started, I'll catch myself, I'll start recording and I'll be like, no, this isn't turning out well. And then I'll stop and I'll start over. And then I'll do that a few times in a row. It's started doing it just maybe once or twice and then started doing it more often. There's been and now, there was a couple of points where I recorded an episode and I was like, well, maybe this is too similar to something I've already talked about, maybe that'd be boring, to whoever's listening. And then it's recording this one now, I'm like, because I've realized, okay, no, this is defeating the whole, it's not supposed to be about that. And it's so easy to get caught up in this whole metrics and engagement game, trying to make sure, I have to make content that's new, and I have to make sure it's interesting, and I have to, make sure that I'm constantly keeping all the metrics going up. It's so easy to get sucked into this when it's again, especially for this whole podcast thing that I'm doing, the whole reason I started doing this in the first place was just to have an outlet to talk about things that were that I couldn't really talk about anywhere else, so that I didn't have a good medium for talking about them anywhere else. It was never supposed to be this thing where I have to polish it and make it nice and make sure I'm always talking about new stuff and things like this. No, it's not. But yeah, and just so here I am, kind of just it's frustrating because I found this has happened with a lot of other different things in the past, where it got really bad, or there was a point where I noticed it was especially strong earlier this year, where when I was at a very low point, and I was trying to vent out feelings through vent art, which is something that I do, is one of my main ways to cope with when I'm at an especially bad mood or an especially weird mood, or things like that. I found that, drawing vent art, writing vent art, things like that are a very good way for me to kind of crystallizes emotions and drop them out of, if you wanted to imagine my mind as being this solution where I have the whatever thing I'm trying to get out dissolved in it, it helps to crystallize it and drop it out of solution to where it's no longer floating around in my head and I can actually focus, and then that helps me to approach the issue from a more cooler-headed type perspective. And I was trying to write this vent art, and I kept having this nagging thought in the back of my head where it's this is no good. This is I would never, if I wanted to submit this somewhere, no one would want to publish this garbage. This is just trash. And again, it's just this idea where, even when I'm trying to vent out these nasty, ugly feelings, that is something that is just trying to get something out of my head, and trying to just write it, and it has to be this thing where it's aesthetically pleasing and something where it's I can just finish writing this off and then immediately email this to get it published online or somewhere or something like that. It's at what point when did this mentality sneak into my head? Why? Where is this coming from? And it's from spending too much time on modern content aggregation platforms, if I had to guess, where everything's reduced to this lowest common denominator metric system, where it's you drew this thing, and I guess maybe it's kind of cool, but it doesn't look like you're getting too much attention on this. Maybe a couple people liked it, but they like everything you do, so it's not that important. So maybe you're not that good of an artist. I mean, look at all these other people who are getting, they draw this way, and then they get, tons of it. They'll post something, and then within 2 minutes, they have double-digit likes and retweets. So maybe if you were a little better of an artist, again, it's a sort of suggestion that obviously is, just a fabrication of your mind, or an implication of this algorithmic system, and then you end up if you aren't careful, it just kind of creeps in, and then before you know it, you're getting super anxious about everything you're trying to create, or you second guess things, and you keep tossing things out that are perfectly good. It's you can't even actually express what you are trying to what you're trying to get out of your head in your creative expression, because you're so worried about making sure that it will feed the system, that it will grease the wheels of this monstrous machine well enough for you to actually, I guess, for number to get bigger, and maybe you will get a new subscriber or follower or something like that. Ring that bell or whatever. And it's it's maddening, because it's you'll catch yourself doing that, and then you're like, no, this is wrong. I need to, and then you'll get back to a more healthier mindset. And then it's as soon as you start trying to share your work again, here we go again. It's almost inescapable. It's in the air almost when you're trying to use these websites. And it's I cannot tell you, because this is certainly not just something that I experience. I cannot tell you the number of other artists and the like that I know who struggle with the exact same thing. It is so easy to get caught up in this numbers game and lose sight of why you started drawing to begin with, why you started writing to begin with, why I started recording these podcasts to begin with. And it could be just because you love to draw. It could be because you have a story that you're trying to tell. You're trying to express something. You're trying to communicate an idea. You just need to get something out of your head. But again, all that gets wiped away, and it's just well, this didn't generate as much engagement as this other thing, so this other thing is just more important, or the system decides that it's more important, basically, which is a very perverse misincentivization, if you ask me, which has led to any number of other larger scale issues, which I'm not going to get into in this video because, well, I'm just not. But that aside, it's just something where it's I'm always having to fight it. And I know that a lot of other artists are continuing to struggle with it, and maybe not necessarily, having a lot of luck in pushing back against it, where they're trying to change up their routines to where they'll oh, well, I know I'll get more engagement or potentially more followers if I make sure to post regularly, so I'll push myself to draw more often, things like that. And it's just, and it's it doesn't, why does it have to be this way? And it's well, again, I could get into this whole thing where it's well, it's because these systems are all maintained by these corporations that are designed to keep people engaged, because it, helps their numbers go up, which helps their quarterly reports look better, so they can get, more shareholders to increase the value, and this whole, blah, blah, blah capitalism. But it's just, it's infuriating to me personally, because it's all I want to do is to, to create these things and, to share them. I mean, it was never, I make these things for my own purposes, but it's nice to be able to share them and potentially find other people with whom they resonate, maybe form some kind of meaningful connection with someone, with other people. It's always nice, but, the whole time, the whole system is hostile to you. And hostile to you, your purposes, and tries to, pull you into this, endless dance, this, this ant mill where it's all these ants kind of going in a circle, lost, just following each other, thinking that, we have to keep, it's artist A sees artist B gets a lot of engagement, so he tries to draw that and follow that same way. And then, of course, that whole time artist B is trying to follow artist C, who's doing it this way. And you end up, again, they're just going in this circle, and all it does is grease the wheels of the machine, and just this purposeless motion that, and the artists and the art alike are what ultimately suffers from it. And it's a shame, and I hate it. But, that aside, I'm also just thinking about, there's another thing, a kind of a realization that I had with this, with social media and, this other kind of dimension to it, where just thinking about how, you'll go on there, and when you first, in my case, with my Twitter, I make a point to only follow, either people who I know like I'm already friends with, or artists whose work I really admire. When I find someone, their art is really, really good, or really, strikes a chord with me, I'll follow them and be like, I'll give you a shot. Let's see what you can do. And to make sure to like block and mute all these other accounts to avoid the noise. But that's a different issue. For me, it's just thinking about like, or the realization that I had was like, I ended up following all of these artists who have talents who are more technically skilled than I am. And they are able to draw in ways that I wish I could draw, with a speed that I wish that I had, things like that. And then what ends up happening is that you fill your entire timeline with art that is all way better than yours because, you're following these artists who you admire. And the end result is that, you don't see all of the art that is like, maybe not quite so technically accomplished, that may be like, lower quality, quote, heavy smear quotes, lower quality art or whatever. At least in the ultimate end result is that you see all this art that's better than yours and you think, man, I'm like, all these other artists on here are so much better than me, and they get all this, they get all this attention on their works, whereas, mine looks way worse and I don't get any engagement at all. I guess no one likes my stuff, or maybe I'm like really just not very good. When again, and it's this self-sustaining kind of problem where, all the artists that people are actually following are all like artists that already have like an established following, right? So you get this sort of false impression that, that there, all these, there are no artists who are in a similar position who are, pouring their heart into their drawings or other creations, and they're getting no engagement. It's like, well, no, like from this illusory perspective that ultimately you yourself created, but is perpetuated by the system itself. That all you see is that, well, all these other artists, they're so much better than me, and they get all this engagement with their posts. So maybe I'm just no good. Maybe I shouldn't even bother to draw. Because and at that point, it gets really concerning, and this is where, like, I think this is the most like problematic aspect of it, is that you end up in this sort of like, when you combine this illusory perspective of, well, all these other artists are just better than me, and combine that with how the system sort of encourages and kind of sinks into your, try to bleed into your mind this idea where the only thing that makes your art valuable is whether it gets engagement or not. You combine those two factors and you end up driving away a lot of artists, or discouraging a lot of artists who might otherwise, if they stuck with it and they didn't get discouraged because of this fakeness, basically, they might, have produced genuinely beautiful, moving pieces of art, web comics or stories or novels or any number of other things, games, etc. And it's very, very frustrating to think about. And the fact that it affects me despite me, like, that's the worst. That just shows how insidious it is, right? That even with how much it frustrates me and how very much aware I am of it, it still affects me to this day, and I still have to fight back against it. And I wish there were more that I could do to try and like push back against it, other than talk angrily into a microphone about it. But as always, I very much appreciate you being willing to listen, and I imagine, hopefully you aren't struggling with this in the same way that I and so many others have been. If you are, well, I feel your pain, but do keep in mind that it's not true. You can't, the engagement, this lowest common denominator appeal, is not what art is about. It's not what it should be about. It never should be about. And certainly, if you have any desire or inkling to create things, forget the engagement. I personally would very much love to see it, and you could send it to me through my email or any other means, or post a link in the comments, or do what you wish. I would love to see it. So I look forward to that, and I look forward to talking to you next time. Take care.